Now let's begin. The email from the client could wait. Marshall Rivers was editing footage of gray wolves in Yellowstone. Their pack dynamics a mirror to human behavior in ways most people never noticed. The alpha female, scarred and grizzled, commanded respect not through violence, but through an unwavering confidence that radiated from every movement. He'd spent 3 months last winter capturing her story, sleeping in his truck when temperatures dropped to -20, and the final cut was nearly perfect. His phone buzzed. A text from Gary Funk, the cinematographer he'd worked with on the Wolf Project. "Isn't that your daughter?" The attached photo loaded slowly. Marshall's stomach dropped. Sophie stood on the corner of Maple and 3rd, her small frame dwarfed by a handwritten cardboard sign that read, "I'm a liar," in thick black marker. The sun beat down mercilessly. The weather app on his phone showed 95 degrees. Her face was red, streaked with tears and sweat. In the background, barely visible through the reflection on a windshield, he could make out Harriet Wilson sitting in her silver Cadillac, watching. Marshall was already moving, grabbing his keys, his mind calculating the 40-minute drive to his house. He'd left Sophie with Stephanie this morning. His wife had promised she'd take their daughter to the library, maybe get ice cream after. It was supposed to be a good day. He called Stephanie. No answer. He called again while running to his truck. Still nothing. The drive blurred. Marshall had learned patience in his work. Hours of waiting for the perfect shot, days of tracking animals through wilderness, months of building trust with skittish subjects. But now his hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles went white, and he broke every speed limit. He'd met Stephanie 9 years ago at a conservation fundraiser in Seattle. She'd been different then, or maybe he'd been too young and hopeful to see the truth. She was beautiful, soft-spoken, and seemed fascinated by his stories of grizzly bears and Arctic foxes. They'd married within a year. Sophie arrived 10 months later, and Marshall had never known love like what he felt holding his daughter for the first time. Harriet Wilson had appeared at the hospital 3 hours after Sophie's birth, already criticizing everything. The baby's name wasn't family appropriate. Stephanie was holding her wrong. The hospital room wasn't clean enough. Marshall had dismissed it as new grandmother anxiety, but the criticisms never stopped. They only grew sharper, more pointed, more cruel. Over the years, Harriet had inserted herself into their lives like a parasite. Weekly dinners became mandatory. Stephanie started asking her mother's opinion on everything. What to cook, how to discipline Sophie, what schools to consider. When Marshall suggested moving to Montana for a documentary project about wolves, Harriet convinced Stephanie it would be abandoning family. They stayed in Seattle. Marshall pulled on a 3rd Street and saw Sophie still standing there. Nearly 3 hours, Gary had said when he called to confirm the photo was real. 3 hours in this heat. He threw the truck into park and sprinted across the street. Sophie's eyes were glazed, unfocused. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. The sign trembled in her small hands. "Baby, I'm here. I've got you." Marshall scooped her up. She was burning with fever, her skin dry despite the heat. Dehydration. Possibly heat stroke. Harriet's Cadillac door opened. "Marshall, what are you doing? She's being punished for lying. You can't just get away from us." His voice was low, controlled. The same tone he used when a mother bear got too close to his camp. "Don't come near my daughter again. I have rights." Stephanie agreed to this discipline. Sophie told her teacher that I don't care. Marshall was already moving toward his truck, Sophie limp in his arms. "Stay away from my family." He called 911 while driving to the nearest hospital. The EMTs met them in the emergency room parking lot, and within minutes Sophie was on a gurney with an 4 in her small arm. Marshall held her other hand as they wheeled her inside. The ER doctor, a tired-looking woman named Dr. Eva O'Donnell, examined Sophie with gentle efficiency. Severe dehydration, early-stage heat exhaustion. Another hour, and we'd be looking at organ damage. She looked at Marshall with questions in her eyes. "How did this happen?" "My mother-in-law." The words tasted like poison. She made her stand outside for hours as punishment. Dr. O'Donnell's expression hardened. "I'm required to report this. Child Protective Services will be contacted." Marshall nodded. Good. He wanted documentation. He wanted evidence. Stephanie arrived 30 minutes later, her mother close behind. Marshall intercepted them in the hallway outside Sophie's room. "You let this happen." He spoke only to Stephanie, refusing to acknowledge Harriet's presence. "Our daughter almost died today. Mother said it was just discipline." Sophie lied about her at school, told her teacher that. I don't care what she told anyone. Marshall stepped closer to his wife, searching for any sign of the woman he'd married. Look at what your mother did. Look at our daughter in that hospital bed. Stephanie's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look at Sophie. She looked at Harriet. You're being dramatic, Harriet said. Children need firm discipline. My daughter turned out fine. Marshall studied his mother-in-law. $75,000 a year from her late husband's military pension. A 3,000-square-foot house in the expensive part of town. Country club membership. Regular trips to Palm Springs. And somehow, despite all that money and privilege, she'd chosen to torture a 9-year-old child. You're not welcome here, Marshall said. Go home. Stephanie, we're leaving. Harriet's command was absolute. Your husband is being unreasonable. Marshall watched his wife's internal struggle play out on her face. For one moment, he thought she might stay, might choose their daughter. But then Stephanie turned and followed her mother down the hallway, leaving Marshall alone with the truth he'd been avoiding for years. His wife was never going to choose them. Not over Harriet. Dr. O'Donnell allowed him to stay in Sophie's room overnight. She woke around midnight, groggy from the 4 fluids and medication. Marshall was immediately at her side. Daddy. Her voice was small, frightened. I'm here, sweetheart. You're safe now. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I lied. What did you lie about, baby? Sophie's small hand gripped his. I told Mrs. Berger at school that Grandma pulled my hair and called me stupid. But Grandma said I was lying, that I was trying to get attention. She said liars need to be punished so they learn. Marshall felt something cold settle in his chest. When did Grandma pull your hair? Last week. During dinner at her house. I spilled my milk and she got really mad. Sophie's words came faster now, tumbling out like she'd been holding them back forever. She does it a lot, Daddy. When you're not there. She pinches me too, on my arms where it doesn't show. And she says mean things about you. She says you're going to leave us like Grandpa left her. I'm never leaving you, Marshall promised. Never. Mommy says I have to be good for Grandma, or she'll get upset. She says Grandma is just trying to help because you're always gone working. Sophie's voice dropped to a whisper. But I don't think Grandma likes me. I think she wishes I wasn't born. Marshall pulled his daughter close, careful of the foreline. That's not true. And none of this is your fault. Daddy, she said if I told you this, she'd do something worse. Sophie's next words came out in a terrified rush. She said she knows how to make people disappear. That she did it before, a long time ago, and nobody ever found out. She said if I wasn't a good girl, if I kept making trouble, she'd make you disappear too, and then she and Mommy would send me away forever. The room seemed to tilt. Marshall forced himself to stay calm, to keep his voice steady. Who did she make disappear, Sophie? A man named Thomas. She showed me a picture of him once, said he used to cause problems for the family until she fixed it. Daddy, I'm scared. Thomas. Marshall's mind raced. Stephanie had mentioned to Thomas once, years ago, her first serious boyfriend, before Marshall. He'd supposedly moved to California, and they'd lost touch. But what if he hadn't moved at all? You don't have to be scared anymore, Marshall told his daughter. I promise you, Grandma is never going to hurt you again. He meant it. Whatever it took, however far he had to go, Harriet Wilson was going to pay for every bruise, every cruel word, every moment of terror she'd inflicted on his little girl. And if his suspicions about Thomas were correct, she was going to pay for much more than that. Marshall Rivers had spent his career documenting predators. He knew how they hunted, how they killed, how they protected their territory. He'd learned patience from waiting in blinds for days. He'd learned strategy from watching wolves coordinate their attacks. He'd learned that the most successful hunters were the ones who understood their prey completely. Harriet Wilson had made a mistake tonight. She'd shown him exactly what kind of predator she was. Now it was time to show her what kind of predator he could be. Dr. O'Donnell released Sophie the next afternoon with instructions for rest and hydration. Marshall took her to his apartment, a small 2-bedroom place he'd rented 3 months ago when living with Stephanie became unbearable. He'd been sleeping there most nights anyway, coming home only when work kept him in the city. Sophie had never seen it before. Is this where you live now? She asked, her voice small. Sometimes. But I'm going to make it better. Make it a real home for us. He showed her the second bedroom, empty except for boxes of camera equipment. This can be your room. We'll paint it any color you want. Get new furniture, posters, whatever you like. Can I really live here? With you? Yes, I'm going to make sure of it. While Sophie rested, Marshall made phone calls. The first was to Brent Foster, a family law attorney he'd met while filming a documentary about salmon conservation. Brent had been the lawyer fighting for indigenous fishing rights. They'd stayed in touch. I need to file for emergency custody, Marshall explained, laying out everything that had happened. Brent was quiet for a long moment. With the hospital report and CPS involvement, you've got a strong case. But Marshall, if your wife fights this, if her mother has money for good lawyers, I'll do whatever it takes. Okay, I'll file the paperwork today. But gather everything you can. Photos, medical records, any evidence of abuse or neglect. The second call was to Gary Funk. That photo you sent me, do you have the original, with all the metadata? Yeah, why? I need it. And I need you to do something for me. It's going to sound strange. You saved my ass in Alaska when that brown bear charged us. Whatever you need, man. Marshall explained what he wanted. Gary hesitated only briefly before agreeing. The third call was the hardest. Stephanie finally answered on the fourth ring. Marshall, Mother is very upset. She says you threatened her at the hospital. I'm filing for emergency custody of Sophie. She's not coming back to that house. Silence. Then, you can't do that. I'm her mother. And you stood by while your mother tortured our daughter. Where were you today, Stephanie? Where were you while Sophie stood in 95-degree heat for 3 hours? I was. Mother said it would only be 30 minutes. She said Sophie needed to learn a lesson. 30 minutes? The photo Gary sent was time-stamped. Sophie was out there for over 3 hours. Your mother lied to you. More silence. Marshall could hear Harriet's voice in the background, sharp and insistent. Stephanie, I need you to think very carefully. Do you remember Thomas? A sharp intake of breath. What? Why would you ask about him? Sophie said your mother told her she made Thomas disappear. That he caused problems for the family. That's ridiculous. Thomas moved to California. Mother wouldn't, but her voice wavered. Uncertain. Are you sure? Have you ever actually heard from him after he left? No, but that doesn't mean. Your mother is dangerous. I don't know what she's done, but I'm going to find out. And in the meantime, Sophie stays with me. If you want to be part of your daughter's life, you're going to have to choose. Her, or your mother. He hung up before she could respond. That evening, after Sophie fell asleep in her new bedroom, Marshall opened his laptop and began researching. Thomas Brennan, 23 years old when he dated Stephanie. They'd been together for 2 years before he suddenly moved to California 12 years ago. No social media presence. No current address Marshall could find. No obituary either, which meant if he was dead, it hadn't been official. Marshall had access to databases most people didn't. 15 years of documentary work meant connections with researchers, park rangers, police officers, and private investigators who helped with location scouting and permits. He called in favors. By midnight, he had confirmation. Thomas Brennan's last known address was in Seattle. His car had been found abandoned near a hiking trail in the Cascade Mountains 3 months after he supposedly moved. Police had investigated briefly, found no evidence of foul play, and the case went cold. Thomas was listed as a missing person, presumed dead by exposure or accident. The hiking trail was one Harriet frequented. She'd been an avid hiker back then, belonged to a club. Marshall stared at the police report, his mind working through possibilities. Harriet had money, connections, and a ruthless streak. If Thomas had threatened her control over Stephanie somehow, if he'd been planning to marry her daughter and move away, it wasn't proof. But it was enough to make Marshall's blood run cold. He thought about Sophie's terrified whisper. She knows how to make people disappear. Marshall had spent years in the wilderness. He knew how easy it was to make something vanish in the mountains. A body that fell into a crevasse, that was dragged off by animals, that sank into a bog. Nature was efficient at erasing evidence. But nature also left traces, and Marshall knew how to find them. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following week. Brent filed a restraining order against Harriet, which a judge granted temporarily based on the hospital report and CPS findings. Stephanie was allowed supervised visitation with Sophie, but she had to come alone. She didn't come. Not once. Marshall told himself it didn't matter. He and Sophie fell into a new rhythm, breakfast together. Then she'd go to a summer day program while he worked from home, editing footage and planning his next move. Evenings were for dinner and reading stories, slowly helping his daughter process everything she'd been through. Daddy, Sophie asked one night, Is mommy ever coming back? I don't know, baby. I hope so. But right now, I need to make sure you're safe. I feel safe with you. That simple statement nearly broke him. I'm glad. You'll always be safe with me. I promise. During the day, while Sophie was at the program, Marshall investigated. He hiked the trail where Thomas's car had been found, documenting everything with his camera. He interviewed former members of Harriet's hiking club, casual conversations that revealed small details. Harriet had been there the weekend Thomas disappeared. She'd complained about her daughter dating an unsuitable boy. She'd seemed particularly cheerful the following week. One woman, Denny Wilkerson, remembered something specific. Harriet said something odd at our meeting that next Tuesday. She said, "Nature has a way of solving problems if you're patient enough." I thought she was talking about a trail dispute, but looking back, Marshall recorded everything. Video, audio, notes. His documentaries were praised for their meticulous attention to detail, and he applied that same rigor now. Gary came through with enhanced footage from the day Sophie was punished. He'd been filming B-roll for a commercial project nearby, and had captured nearly 20 minutes of Sophie standing in the heat, Harriet sitting in her car watching. The footage was damning, showing Harriet occasionally getting out to adjust Sophie's sign or snap photos with her phone, then returning to her air-conditioned vehicle. She was documenting it, Gary said quietly as they reviewed the footage. Like she was proud of what she was doing. Marshall's jaw clenched. That's exactly what she was doing. Creating her own record of Sophie's discipline to show Stephanie. Proof that she was handling things. Brent used the footage to strengthen their custody case. Judge Harrison is going to take one look at this and rule in your favor. No question. But Marshall wasn't satisfied with just custody. That wouldn't be justice. That wouldn't protect Sophie from future retaliation. Harriet needed to be completely neutralized, legally, socially, permanently. He needed more than suspicions about Thomas. He needed proof. The idea came to him while editing footage of a wolverine. The animal was checking a trap line he'd been monitoring, approaching cautiously, testing for danger. Smart, careful, but ultimately unable to resist the lure. Predators could be baited. You just needed to understand their weaknesses. Harriet's weakness was control. The need to be right, to be in charge, to dominate everyone around her. She couldn't resist exerting power over people, couldn't stand being challenged. Marshall began to formulate a plan. The custody hearing went exactly as Brent predicted. Judge Harrison reviewed the hospital records, the CPS report, and Gary's footage. She listened to Dr. O'Donnell testify about Sophie's injuries and dehydration. She heard Sophie's own statement, delivered in chambers with a child psychologist present. Stephanie attended with Harriet, who sat rigid and furious in the gallery. When Stephanie was called to testify, she could barely speak. Every answer was punctuated by glances toward her mother. Mrs. Rivers, Judge Harrison said, her patience clearly thin. I'm asking you directly. Did you know your daughter was standing outside in 95-degree heat for over 3 hours? Mother said it would only be a short time. To teach Sophie about lying. And you thought this was appropriate discipline? Mother knows best. She raised me, and I turned out fine. Judge Harrison removed her glasses. Mrs. Rivers, your daughter was hospitalized for heat exhaustion and dehydration. You don't appear to comprehend the severity of this situation. Marshall watched his wife crumble under the judge's scrutiny. Part of him felt pity. The rest felt nothing but contempt for how thoroughly Harriet had broken her. The ruling came swift and decisive. Full physical custody to Marshall. Stephanie could have supervised visitation once she completed a parenting course and family therapy. Harriet was prohibited from any contact with Sophie. Outside the courthouse, Harriet approached Marshall. 2 sheriff's deputies immediately stepped between them, enforcing the restraining order. You're making a mistake, she called out. Sophie needs proper discipline. She needs family. You're always gone, chasing animals in the wilderness. What kind of father? The kind who doesn't torture his child, Marshall said calmly. The kind who puts her safety first. You'll regret this. I have lawyers. I have money. You'll what? Make me disappear like you did Thomas? The effect was immediate. Harriet's face went white, then red. I don't know what lies Sophie told you, but I wasn't talking about Sophie. Marshall kept his voice level, conversational. I was talking about Thomas Brennan. You remember him? Stephanie's boyfriend. The one who disappeared 12 years ago near the Cascade hiking trail. Your favorite trail. That was an accident. He was inexperienced, He went hiking alone. How would you know that? The police never determined what happened to him. Harriet's mouth snapped shut. She'd said too much, and she knew it. Marshall smiled. Enjoy your lawyers, Harriet. You're going to need them. He walked away, Sophie's hand in his, leaving his mother-in-law sputtering in the courthouse plaza. That evening, Marshall received an email. The sender was listed as a friend, but the contents were explosive. Thomas Brennan's journal, or at least excerpts from it. The entries detailed his relationship with Stephanie and his growing concerns about Harriet's controlling behavior. The final entry was dated 2 days before Thomas disappeared. Stephanie agreed to move to Portland with me. We're telling her mother tomorrow. I'm nervous. Harriet won't take this well, but we have to break free. This isn't healthy. I love Stephanie, but I can't watch her mother destroy her anymore. Tomorrow we tell Harriet, then we leave. Start fresh. The email included scanned images of the physical journal pages. Marshall couldn't verify if they were real, but something about them felt authentic. The handwriting was consistent, the dates aligned with what he knew. More importantly, if he had these, who else did? Marshall replied to the email. Who are you? How did you get these? The response came 30 minutes later. Someone who knew Thomas. Someone who's waited 12 years for justice. You're not the only person Harriet Wilson has hurt, but you might be the only one in a position to do something about it. Use these wisely. No signature. No identifying information. But Marshall suspected he knew who it was. Someone from Thomas's family. Someone who'd never believed the hiking accident story. He forwarded everything to Brent. I don't know if this is admissible, but it's something. It's a start, Brent agreed. But Marshall, be careful. If Harriet killed Thomas, and that's a big if, she's dangerous. Don't do anything stupid. I won't, Marshall lied. Because he was absolutely going to do something. Something that would force Harriet to reveal the truth. Something that would protect Sophie forever. He just needed to bait the trap perfectly. The plan required patience and precision. First, Marshall hired a private investigator named Albert Dawson, a former park ranger who specialized in cold cases involving wilderness disappearances. He gave Albert everything he'd found about Thomas. I need to know what happened, Marshall said. I need proof. If she killed him in the mountains after 12 years. Albert shook his head. Bodies don't last. Animals, weather, time. But I'll see what I can find. Old trails, buried equipment, anything. While Albert worked, Marshall implemented Phase 2, public pressure. He began posting his documentary work on social media, building an audience. His wolf pack footage went viral, gaining him 60,000 followers in 2 weeks. He shared stories about Sophie, about being a single father, about fighting for custody. He kept Harriet's name out of it, but people filled in the gaps. Local news picked up the story. Wildlife filmmaker wins custody after daughter's heat exhaustion punishment. The article mentioned the grandmother's role, and while it didn't name her, anyone in Seattle's social circles could figure it out. Harriet's country club friends started asking questions. Invitations dried up. People whispered. Marshall documented all of it. Every social media comment, every news article, every piece of gossip. He was creating a narrative, setting the stage. Then came the breakthrough. Albert called with news. I found something. Old campsite near where Thomas's car was abandoned. Someone buried a backpack 12 years ago. The decomposition matches the timeline. Contents include a wallet with Thomas Brennan's ID, a phone that's too degraded to access, and climbing rope that was cut, not frayed. Someone buried evidence. Professional level concealment. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. The location is off trail, marked only if you know what to look for. Albert paused. There's something else. A tree near the burial site has initials carved into it. HW and a date. 2 days after Thomas disappeared. Harriet Wilson, marking her territory like an animal. Can you prove it's her initials? Not conclusively, but combined with everything else. It's a pattern. I'm turning this over to the police. They'll have to reopen Thomas's case. Marshall felt something dark and satisfied settle in his chest. Thank you, Albert. Be careful, Marshall. If she did this once. I know. That's exactly why I have to finish this. The police reopening Thomas Brennan's case as a potential homicide made headlines. Harriet's name wasn't mentioned initially, but the investigation focused on persons of interest from the victim's past. The Seattle Times ran a feature about Thomas, including interviews with his family who'd never believed the accident story. Marshall watched Harriet's world crumble from a distance. Her lawyers issued statements. She claimed ignorance, shock, grief. But the evidence was building, and the social pressure was immense. Then Marshall made his final move. He sent Harriet a message through an intermediary, a lawyer who couldn't be tied back to him. The message was simple. I have Thomas's journal. I have the burial site evidence. I have witnesses who remember your behavior that week. The police will find enough to charge you eventually. But there's another option, a recorded confession delivered to me, admitting what you did to Thomas and what you did to Sophie. In exchange, I'll advocate for a plea deal. Life in prison instead of death penalty. It was a bluff. Washington had abolished the death penalty, and Marshall had no authority to negotiate plea deals. But he was betting Harriet didn't know that. He was betting her narcissism would make her want to confess, to explain, to justify. Because that's what predators did when cornered. They fought back with the only weapons they had, words and justification. 3 days later, Harriet requested a meeting. Marshall met Harriet in a public park, with Albert and Brent both nearby as witnesses. He wore a wire, hidden in his jacket. Everything would be recorded. Harriet looked diminished. Her country club polish had faded, replaced by dark circles and rigid tension. But her eyes still held that cruel spark. You think you've won, she said as greeting. I think I protected my daughter. That's all that matters. Sophie is weak. Just like Stephanie. She needed discipline, needed to be taught strength. Standing in the heat for 3 hours isn't strength. It's torture. You wouldn't understand. You're never here. Always running off to film your animals, leaving Stephanie to handle everything. Just like Thomas wanted to take her away, abandon her responsibilities. Marshall kept his voice neutral. So you stopped Thomas. He was going to ruin everything. Portland? Starting over? Stephanie would have been alone, vulnerable. He wasn't good enough for her. Wasn't strong enough. What did you do to him, Harriet? She smiled, and it was terrible. I convinced him to go hiking. Told him I wanted to discuss his plans, maybe give my blessing. He was so eager, so naive. We hiked to a beautiful spot, very remote. I asked him to check if a trail was safe ahead. He was always trying to prove himself. Her voice took on a dreamy quality. The rope was old. Frayed. It snapped when he trusted his weight to it. A tragic accident. You cut the rope. I may have inspected it beforehand. Ensured nature would take its course. She leaned forward. But you can't prove that. The rope is long gone. His body is gone. There's nothing but speculation. Albert found the backpack you buried. Found your initials carved in a tree. Her smile faltered. That doesn't prove anything. It proves you were there. Combined with Thomas's journal, with witness statements about your behavior, with the physical evidence, it's enough. The police will charge you. Then why offer me a deal? Because I want Sophie to never have to think about you again. I want you locked away where you can never hurt anyone. A confession means no trial, no testimony, no dragging Sophie through more trauma. Harriet considered this. Marshall could see her calculating, weighing options. And if I confess, you'll advocate for me. I'll tell them you cooperated. That you showed remorse. Another lie. He'd show remorse for nothing. I want immunity for everything else. Everything else. There were others. Before Thomas. People who caused problems. She said it casually, like discussing grocery shopping. But they don't matter now. Ancient history. Marshall felt sick. How many? Does it matter? They were all weak. All deserving. She studied him with something like respect. You're not weak, though. I see that now. You're like me. A survivor. Someone who does what's necessary. I'm nothing like you. Aren't you? You're manipulating me right now, playing predator. Using your daughter as bait to draw me out. She laughed. I raised Stephanie to be obedient, complaint. Thought I was doing her a favor. But maybe I should have made her more like you. More ruthless. This conversation is over. Marshall stood. The police will contact you formally. Your confession has been recorded. Albert heard everything. You're done. Harriet's face transformed. Rage replaced calculation. You recorded me? You think that's legal? My lawyers will. Washington is a two-party consent state for recording. I informed you at the start of this conversation that I was recording. Marshall had indeed said it, quietly, when she first sat down. She'd been so focused on negotiating, she hadn't processed it. You continued talking anyway. That's consent. You bastard. You think you've won? I'll destroy you. Stephanie will never speak to you again. Sophie will. Sophie is safe. Stephanie made her choice. And you're going to prison. Marshall walked away, leaving Harriet screaming threats in the park. Albert, and Brent met him at his truck. Got every word, Brent confirmed, checking the recording device. This is admissible. She confessed to Thomas's murder and implied there were others. Others, Albert repeated grimly. Jesus, I'll start looking into unsolved cases from her past. Missing persons, suspicious accidents. Marshall climbed into his truck, suddenly exhausted. Make sure Sophie never has to hear any of this. Whatever happens, she doesn't need to know the details. We'll protect her, Brent promised. The confession sparked a massive investigation. Police found 3 other cases potentially linked to Harriet. A hiking accident victim from 20 years ago who'd been dating Stephanie's older brother before he died. The brother, not the boyfriend. Harriet had lost her son to cancer and blamed his girlfriend for not supporting him properly. A business partner of her late husband who'd disappeared after threatening to expose financial irregularities. And a woman from her book club who'd challenged Harriet's leadership. Forensic teams scoured the Cascade Mountains. They found partial remains of Thomas Brennan, enough for positive DNA identification. The cause of death was confirmed as a fall from significant height, with evidence of rope fiber in his clothing matching the cut rope found in the buried backpack. Harriet's trial lasted 3 weeks. Marshall didn't attend. He refused to give her the satisfaction of his presence. But he watched the news coverage, listened to the testimony from forensic experts and Thomas's grieving family. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, tampering with evidence, abuse of a corpse. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Life in prison without possibility of parole. Marshall was home with Sophie when the verdict came through. They were making dinner together, Sophie carefully measuring ingredients for homemade pizza while explaining everything she'd learned at summer camp that day. His phone buzzed. A text from Brent. Life without parole. She's done. Marshall set the phone down and returned his attention to his daughter. What kind of toppings do you want? Everything. Peppers and mushrooms and olives. And, can we do pineapple? Absolutely. Pineapple pizza is the best. After dinner, after Sophie was in bed, Marshall stood on his balcony looking out at the Seattle skyline. He thought about Harriet, about Thomas, about all the people she'd hurt. He thought about the wolves he'd filmed, how the pack had eventually turned on the alpha when she became too old and vicious, driving her out to die alone. Justice wasn't always clean. It wasn't always fast. But sometimes, if you were patient enough, it came. His phone rang. Stephanie. Hello. I saw the news. Her voice was small, broken. Mother. She really did it. Killed Thomas. Hurt all those people. Yes. I'm so sorry, Marshall. I should have seen it. Should have protected Sophie. Should have protected you. You were a victim too, Marshall said, and meant it. She had control over you your entire life. I've been in therapy. Intensive sessions, trying to understand. She took a shaky breath. I want to see Sophie. If you'll let me. I know I have to earn it, but we'll start slow. Supervised visits. You keep going to therapy. You prove you're ready to put Sophie first. I will. I promise. A pause. Thank you for saving her. For being strong enough to stop Mother when I couldn't. After they hung up, Marshall returned to the living room where his laptop was still open. He'd been editing a new documentary, this time about coyotes, showing how they adapted to urban environments, how they thrived despite human encroachment. The footage was beautiful. The animals were survivors, clever and resilient. They protected their young fiercely and drove out threats without mercy. Marshall understood them perfectly. 6 months later, Marshall and Sophie stood at the edge of a meadow in Yellowstone. The wolf pack he'd filmed before was denning nearby, and he wanted Sophie to see them from a safe distance. There, he whispered, pointing. The alpha female emerged from the tree line, followed by 3 cubs. They played in the fading light, tumbling over each other while their mother watched. They're beautiful, Sophie breathed. They are. And see how the mother watches them? How she's always between them and any danger. She's protecting them. Always. That's what parents do. Sophie was quiet for a moment, then. Daddy, I read online about Grandma. About the trial. Marshall's heart clenched. Sophie. It's okay. I wanted to know. Wanted to understand. She looked up at him with eyes far older than 9 years should contain. I'm glad she can't hurt anyone anymore. Me too, baby. And Daddy? Thank you for protecting me. For being like the wolf mother. Marshall pulled his daughter close, watching the wolf pack play in the golden hour light. Always, Sophie. Always. Later that evening, back at their cabin, Marshall received an email from an address he didn't recognize. You did it. Thomas can rest now. Thank you. It was signed simply, Jessica Brennan, Thomas's sister, the one who'd sent the journal pages, the one who'd waited 12 years for justice. Marshall replied, he can. And so can everyone else she hurt. He closed the laptop and joined Sophie by the fire, where she was reading a book about wildlife photography. She wanted to be a documentarian like him when she grew up, she'd announced last week. Wanted to show people the truth about nature. Marshall thought about truth, about justice, about the long game. He'd learned patience from the wolves, strategy from years of tracking elusive animals, and ruthlessness from understanding predators. Harriet Wilson had been a predator, but every predator eventually became prey. That was nature's truth, and Marshall had simply helped it along. Daddy, Sophie said, looking up from her book. Can we go see the bears tomorrow? Absolutely. We'll get up early, bring the good cameras. Will you teach me how to track them? I'll teach you everything I know. Because that's what fathers did. They protected. They taught. They ensured their children could survive and thrive in whatever wilderness they faced. And sometimes, when necessary, they showed their children that even the most dangerous predators could be brought down. But that last lesson could wait. For now, Sophie just needed to know she was safe, loved, and free. Everything else would come in time. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.